Now that we're all refocused on the topic in hand, that is electric mobility, I'll hand it back to EJ to introduce the first session.
Thank you so much, Aradhna. So for our first session, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mr. David Gumbs, Director with the African Islands and Southeast Asia Program at RMI. David works closely with governments and utilities, including here in Bermuda, to help achieve their renewable energy targets. Before joining RMI, David was the CEO of Anguilla Electric Company. We're very lucky to have David on our team and as moderator of this first session, which will explore the global perspective on electric mobility. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, EJ. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you this morning. And we look forward to a fantastic session today on exploring the electric vehicle market and possibilities in Bermuda. Today we have an excellent lineup of panelists and presentations that we'll be sharing with you. So we're really excited to get things rolling. With that said, I will briefly introduce the panel members that will be speaking in this session, which is going to talk specifically about the electric vehicle technology advancement and market trajectory. It is not only going to look at that market from a Bermuda perspective and what the framework in Bermuda that exists today and potentially could be tomorrow, but it's going to look at regional trends and global trends to help us, put within the context where Bermuda is today and where Bermuda will be and can be tomorrow. With that said, we have several panelists or presenters that will be speaking here today. The speakers include Stephen Weinstein, Bermuda Business Development Agency. Stephen was elected as the BDA chair in 2020 and has been a member of the board since 2016. He currently serves as an advisor to Renaissance RE Holdings Limited, having retired after 2 decades from his role as Executive Vice President, Group General Counsel, Corporate Secretary, and Chief Compliance Officer. During his time at Renaissance RE, Stephen was chair of the Risk Sciences Foundation, the company's charitable vehicle committed to researching and developing risk mitigation. My apologies. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. 1 second, let me clear my throat, please. All right, back with you now. Sorry about that. Stephen was chair of the Risk Sciences Foundation, the company's charitable vehicle committed to researching and developing risk mitigation techniques and raising awareness through conferences and outreach events, including the award-winning Risk Mitigation Leadership Forum series, and served as a member of the executive. We also have Britta Gross, who is a member of the RMI team. Britta leads RMI's mobility practice, focused on the market-driven strategies required to accelerate towards carbon-free mobility solutions. Britta was formerly the Director of Advanced Vehicle Commercialization at General Motors, responsible for the energy and infrastructure strategies required to enable the commercialization of battery and hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. Britta is also currently a commissioner for the Orlando Utility Commission, Orlando's electric and water utility. Welcome and glad to have you with us, Britta. I'd also like to introduce Joan Arbia, United Nations Environment Program, MOVE. Joan is the leader of the MOVE program, Electric Mobility in Latin America and the Caribbean at the UNEP Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Joan has a master's degree in international economics and development. She has been working in urban transport and mobility for almost a decade. The last 5 years specifically in transportation electrification projects in Latin America. Last but not least, we also have Mr. Chuck Gray, member of the RMI team. Since joining RMI's carbon-free mobility practice in 2017, Chuck has worked to facilitate transportation electrification strategies for states, cities, and utilities by addressing market failures and deriving beneficial electrification outcomes. So quite a diverse group of panelists and presenters this morning. So with that said, we would love to get right into things and get this program going by introducing Britta and asking Britta to lead with her presentation.
And David, let me correct something there. I am going to present a little bit of perspective from RMI, and then of course we've asked Britta to really fill in the US perspective. Now that said, you know, Britta, if off the cuff here, if you do have something you want to share when they're asking questions, absolutely, let's do that. A little clarifier here. We are a bit ahead of schedule, so we have some time here until the minister shows up, and the minister is going to be right on time. So we're trying to get that one synced up well. So I will, let me see if I can share my screen. Often this goes perfectly and many times it doesn't. And I'll take the moment to say that David, EJ, and a gentleman you'll see later this afternoon were on island last week with Aaron, and we're able to visit with several of you. We did run into the COVID challenge, of course, and lockdowns kind of, you know, came back around, but it was nice to be on island and see most of you and correct directly again and partake in wonderful weather was great. So let me do a check here and see if I am sharing the right screen. Can you guys just see a single slide with the Ford F-150 on the side that everybody is incredibly excited about, understandably. So let me just pause for a moment on that Ford F-150. It's exciting. I'm not going to talk about this in the presentation, but the reason that one continues to come up, you know, I'm seeing this regularly in working groups, is they're the first manufacturer that's been willing to come out with a resiliency response and the vehicle to home, and they're marketing that right up front. So just as we think about electric vehicles, transition to renewable energy, you know, resilience has just become top of mind, I think, for everybody, definitely starting in the Caribbean context. So it's exciting to see that we're already there before 2022, in which we're marketing our products in this way. So David gave me an introduction, you know, Chuck Ray here with RMI's Carbon-Free Mobility Program. We're dedicated to catalyzing an electric, connected, and equitable transportation future. And then just most of my work has been in electric buses and fleets in the US and the Caribbean. So in the next few minutes, I'll seek to illuminate the overall market of electric vehicles, what's driving the transition, and what's right in front of us, as well as what's around the corner. With that, I want to take a look at electric vehicle commitments to EVs, who's adopting these electric vehicles, and I'm going to provide a little bit of perspective on the US. Britta can really round us out there, as well as the UK. You should see a second slide now. You know, we need to launch with, why does transportation have to change? Well, because it's the #1 source of carbon emissions. It's outpacing electricity, globally and, in most countries as well. And coming from a US perspective, this is the #1 carbon emitting sector for us in the world. So it's really important for us to get out in front of this or to catch up maybe and remove emissions from transportation with zero emissions drive. Today, that's electric vehicles. Around the corner, that could be hydrogen, et cetera. However, it's not just about climate. Emissions affects local air quality, causes human health issues, disproportionately affects those who live and work in high combustion zones, and it creates dependencies on imports as well as volatile prices. So although fossil fuels have played a large source of power that built the modern world, we're now dealing with the side effects. In the US, to align with the 1.5C, we need to cut transportation emissions virtually or essentially by half, 45% by 2030 of what we're referring to as the decisive decade. Now, we think we can accomplish this largely in the light duty sector, light duty vehicles, cars, small cars and trucks, in which we need to convert a little bit over a quarter of the existing rolling stock by the end of decade. That's 70 million EVs on the road by 2030. We need to get a 15% slice of the pie, out of medium heavy duty. And, we're relying on buses, of course, with almost a third of those to be converted by 2030. Now, it's interesting. This also does require on the light duty side, at least the calculations behind this, is a 20% reduction in vehicle miles traveled through alternative mobility forms. But we have baked in an increase in vehicle miles traveled with trucking, and we can really think about delivery and how the pandemic's brought us forward with door-to-door delivery. We think the delivery in medium heavy-duty trucking fleet increases by a quarter. And it's not shown here on the slide, but this is all dependent on achieving an 85% carbon-free grid over the same time frame. The good news is that we're well along that path. Renewable energy is the lowest cost to install going forward, but we do have a long way to go. Now, what this has resulted in is an ICE phase out, internal combustion engine phase out goals. I think it's really profound to phase out sales of internal combustion engines. What I was thinking of is the 2040 club. That's really Canada has already made these commitments. France, Spain, Taiwan, Singapore. I think what's a bit astounding is those who have made commitments to phase out the sale of electric vehicles by 2030. Now, California from the US context at 2035, a couple other states will probably join on soon. But it's really Iceland, UK, Ireland, Scotland, and of course, Scandinavian countries really shooting for 2030. A couple of other related perspectives here is that 31 countries, states or cities at last count have outright banned diesel and gasoline vehicles from operating, in their locales around these same timeframes, definitely by 2035. We have somewhere on the order of $400 billion has been invested in the EV supply chain, and that's been happening over a number of years now, really in battery manufacturing supply, and now we're seeing, full retooling of manufacturing plants. Recent numbers showed us that in the U.S., 7 of the 44 U.S. assembly plants are slated to be all electric vehicle production by 2025, which is right around the corner. Most auto manufacturers have committed to electric vehicles, and half expect 50% of their sales to be EV by 2030. And that's reinforced with a recent announcement between the Biden administration and the big 3 auto manufacturers to shoot for that same goal of 50% sales to be electric vehicles by the end of the decade. So a lot is going on, whether we see all these vehicles on the road or not. Now, this slide you can't read, but I thought it was worthy to put in here because these are recent information. We'll share these decks after the show. On the left is what I pulled out of the UK plan. They've done a count of auto manufacturers in the UK and what those commitments look like so far. I mean, if we want to read off a few of these, I mean, Bentley is looking to be only electric by 2030. Audi is making aggressive moves, you know, at the 2026 timeframe. We have Volvo saying they're not going to make another internal combustion engine after 2030. And even Stellantis, which holds a number of brands, you know, is really targeting that 2025 realm, and definitely in Europe. On the right-hand side is an ICCT report that came out in, I think, December, and it's just a nice one that really shows what have those announced investments been, how many electric vehicle models, and what are their sales goals. So we don't need to read those off, but it's a nice reference if you all need to use it after the fact. So what this is resulting in, again, just a snapshot. I wanted to focus on what's available today as opposed to, you know, what's around the corner by 2025. Just to kind of talk through this slide. In the upper left is a quick snapshot of what's available in the US today. It's definitely not everything, you know, and the exciting part there I launched with is around pickups. Those same platforms are for the larger SUVs. So, you know, the larger vehicle is a popular item here in the US. So that's important to get to adoption. On the bottom left are the cars that are available today in the UK that I pulled out of the UK report, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And I didn't want to miss, you know, this upper right are the large vehicles. We have electric available in every category. Of course, the challenge there is the price premiums are still significant because the scale of each of those types of vehicles is still fairly small. On the lower right, and this is, you know, it's really about delivery vans. This is the news all this year for 2021. We have really aggressive commitments coming forward for those in the delivery sector from the corporate side. I think we'll see the vans outpace the privately owned light duty vehicles fairly rapidly, you know, over the next couple of years here. So reverting, you know, going back to, you know, what's driving the demand, if you will, who is pulling these electric vehicles into their fleets. It really starts with corporations. I mean, they've led the charge with a campaign that's Renewable Energy 100, and they're following up the same on the transportation side. We already have commitment for 5 million vehicles on the road with these large corporations by 2030. In the US, there's a mayor's collaborative that's now of over 250 cities and counties that are working together to electrify fleets. And then the UK is looking to electrify their government fleet of 40,000 vehicles. And I think what's notable here is that they're focused on car and van and achieving zero tailpipe emissions by 2027. So that's really aggressive. Now, there's a few other, you know, data points I think worthy of mention that you don't see on the slide, so I'll just read them out. IKEA Retail is committed to provide their customers 100% zero emission delivery by 2025. That's quick. FedEx has a goal for 50% of their fleet by 2025 to be electric and 100% of purchases by 2030. And then Amazon, you know, is one of the major investors behind that Rivian pickup with a $700 million investment for 100,000 electric vans on the road. And I've already seen at least one of those. So hopefully we'll see those, you know, showing up in our mailboxes soon. And to follow up on the fleet side, you know, the US, it's a question now, but we aim to electrify the federal fleet. That's almost 650,000 vehicles. And we should be able to achieve that with the Postal Service as well, whose vehicles are really old. And that's 140,000. So the point is there's a lot going on the policy side, an equal amount coming in through the manufacturers, and then the demand signal, which Britta will always point to, is absolutely important. So let's spend a couple of minutes on UK's plan. I read through this. It's you know, fairly astounding what they want to achieve. The important point I think that's interesting is there's a two-step process here. They want to end the sale of new fossil fuel or petroleum-based vehicles by 2030, and then move to an outright ban of being able to even own and operate an internal combustion engine by 2035. And then I pointed out before, they're focused on light-duty cars and vans because that's what we can confidently make a statement about today. So cars and vans are here. Now, if we look at the objectives, what's behind this overall roadmap, and, like I said, we'll share this deck. There is a link in here as well to this plan. I think it's worth having a look at. It's really comprehensive. We have to fill in, the how to do these things as opposed to what we're going to do. So there's a lot of work to be done. But right around the corner is a CO2 emissions regulatory regime that they're going to come up with, tax incentives, and then, of course, financing incentives behind the cars themselves and the infrastructure. But what I notated in reading through the plan is, I've said it twice now, it's really a focus on that government fleet. So it's the fleets that we have the purview over. We can make those commitments now. Bermuda is doing this. It's incredibly encouraging. A focus on infrastructure. And it's interesting, in the UK's perspective, consumer awareness and confidence is really the third pillar they're going to come forward with. Baked within there is battery health guarantees for second-use vehicles in the secondhand market, as well as an overall recycling scheme as well. So we don't know exactly what those business models look like. We're working through them now, but we do have a commitment to do so. And I'll end with just kind of wrapping up and to say that, focusing on decarbonization, that's the big driver. There's economic development opportunity here. And, it all comes down to human health and air quality and the impact that we realize transportation emissions has on us individually and our cities. And with that, David, hand it back to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Chuck. Chuck offered us a nice overview of what's happening globally in the UK and some very specific markets. And I think it helps to frame sort of the direction as to where the trends are in the mobility sector. As you can see, there's some very aggressive movements, not only manufacturers, but various countries are setting their regional or their internal policies to make the transition happen at a much more effective pace. With that said, I would like to invite Britta to talk a little bit about the trends that are happening in the US market. Britta, would you kindly turn on your screen and pull up your presentation? We're happy to hear from you.
So thank you very much, David. I don't have slides today. I think Chuck did a fantastic job. I hope you guys can hear me, first of all, and see me. Very good, thank you. Yeah, Chuck did a great job of laying out sort of the landscape here in the US. Maybe let me fill in some details. Because on the one hand, there's a lot of momentum. A lot has changed in the last, I'm just gonna say 8 months, maybe even going back a year or two. But a lot has changed. I've been in this industry now for, well, I've been in several industries, and I've been in automotive really for the last 25 years. I have never seen a moment like right now, both from inside an automaker and now outside the automaker. Looking back, I was just dreaming of the day when these kinds of announcements would be made, and the commitment level. And sort of you're seeing commitments from automakers, truck makers, the fleet operators on the side of sort of demand for the vehicles. You're seeing the government step in with their own visions. It would be better if everyone sort of aligned on the same goal and the same vision, so we knew what we were all going after. But I don't want to minimize what's happening right now at this moment in time. So let me emphasize a couple points that Chuck made, and then let me go on a little bit deeper for you guys that may not be as close to what's happening across the automotive space and what's happening in the market in general. So Chuck talked about the fact that GM, Ford, and GM, Ford, and Chrysler, now Stellantis, met with President Biden here about, I'm going to say now, like, time is just a crazy thing right now to me, but maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago. And they announced that they were committed to a sales goal of 40 to 50% EV sales by 2030. And when you look at the weight and the sales portion from GM, Ford, and Stellantis, that's about 7 of 17 million vehicles sold in the United States each year. 7 of 17 million. So these are extraordinary commitments and an extraordinary set of challenges that this presents. And but so a really, really significant challenge, but also just great momentum, because this then drives certainty into a market where private investment has been lagging. Private investment lags whenever there's uncertainty about supply being available, demand showing up, the costs of getting some of this stuff done. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second too. I can expound again on the GM commitment. GM has gone further and said that by 2035, they aim to sell only electric vehicles. An extraordinary announcement by a major automaker who is not in the business of making loud claims about technologies that sort of are just kicking off, sort of like in the last 10 years. So this is a big deal here in the United States. Chuck showed some data. I love the slide. I got to get that from Chuck, the list of all the automaker commitments. I always zoom into sort of who are the first ones that are going to show up in the market. And that's, that's Jaguar, who, a year ago announced that by 2025, they would only be selling electric vehicles, and Volvo by 2030. So you're seeing these really ambitious goals topped off by some major automaker goals. The UK, of course, we talked about some of the countries that are already stepping up. The UK and Europe in general it looks like they're sort of coalescing around 2035 as the point in time when they don't want to see gasoline and diesel vehicles sold anymore in Europe. In California, same thing, 2035. I said GM was 2035, right? So we got California, New Jersey, and Massachusetts are both talking about a 2035, somehow, maybe not a banning of ICEs. Certainly you can sell used vehicles for some time to come, but certainly aiming for 100% sales of electric vehicles. But I think the true measure of what's happening on, I do believe the commitments. I know that they intend to make these numbers. The question is whether all the other parties and all the other enablers happen to enable it to build a conducive environment to sell these vehicles. But the true measure, of course, is where the dollars are flowing right now. And when you look at the dollars that have been committed and are being spent on plant retooling, so you're taking those engine and transmission plants and those vehicle assembly plants that have today been building internal combustion engine vehicles. And you start to see, I think Chuck mentioned that 7 of the 40 or 44 assembly plants in the United States are already seeing investment, already turning into electric vehicle production plants. That's what you want to see. GM, Ford, and Stellantis have all announced 30 billion plus investments in electrification. And I'll just tell you behind the scenes that when you hear those kinds of numbers, not only does it mean that dollars are going into electric vehicles and battery development to try to bring down the costs and so on, it means that investments probably not going into combustion engine vehicles and transmissions anymore. I don't know. I don't know for sure. I don't have any inside knowledge, but I'm just saying that when you see the dollars turn in a certain direction and that magnitude of dollars, it can't go everywhere. And it probably can't go to invest in improved engines and transmissions. And that's the sign that the times are changing. And there's going to come a point in time when consumers don't even want the old engines and the old transmission systems and the lack of performance that's going to be sort of offset now by what you will get with an electric vehicle. So I think those are really important, tangible things to watch for. And that's happening right now, those very, very big investment dollars. I will also say as sort of this positive sign of momentum and things that are changing. For a long time now, I think for the last 7 years, I've been tracking about 2% EV sales across the United States. So in a year of sales of all vehicles, 2% pretty regularly, pretty steadily over the last 7 years have been electric vehicles. Those numbers have changed in the last year. We're now looking at an overall 4% doubling of EV sales across the United States. We're not talking just California. Across the United States, it's a 4% overall now. So a doubling in just the last year and a half. 8 states and the District of Columbia, our capital, 8 states and the District of Columbia are now seeing over 5% market share of EVs. California is all the way up to 14% now. We're starting to look like some European countries now. So these numbers are getting ambitious. And I thought it was interesting. I just purposely for this meeting today went and looked at what's happening in Hawaii, an island state, has many of the same sort of characteristics that you might find in Bermuda. 7.5% EV sales now is the market share in Hawaii. So I think that that's important to sort of notice the trends in EV sales, where the states are adopting, and how this is growing very, very rapidly from where we have been pretty consistently over the last 7 or 8 years. Fleets, let's go to demand right now. Fleets are now feeling a lot of pressure from stakeholders, as is every corporation, right? It's, you know, there's, when you follow the dollars, you also need to follow investors. And what are they calling for? And they're calling for more awareness of climate. They're calling for more awareness of local air pollution. And so it's finally starting to resonate with companies and fleet operators. So you're starting to see fleet operators like Amazon, FedEx, UPS, Uber, and Lyft have additional issues to contend with as they sort of deal with their new model of ride hailing and ride sharing. So you've got these investor pressures that are also driving these companies to make very, very bold announcements too. Uber and Lyft, partly through regulation, but also they're trying to stay a little, a step ahead of regulation. Uber and Lyft have announced that by 2030, they also would intend to be fully electrified. So again, you're starting to see these 2030 and 2035 unmissable commitments to electrification. So that's fleets showing up for demand. And then if I look at even what utilities are doing, they are beginning to lay out investment plans for charging infrastructure and grid interconnects. They're laying out investment plans, and I can name 3 off the top of my head that have now adopted our own numbers for electrification in 2030 and 2035, the goals that we have to get to the 45% carbon emission reductions that Chuck talked about. 3 utilities have already designed investment plans that by 2030 would support 20% penetration of EVs across their entire service territories. So these are, and one of them is Xcel Energy, right? Minnesota, Colorado, major utility here in the United States. So when you start to see them go to regulators and saying, we believe the future is 20% penetration or, around 20% penetration of EVs in 2030. And here's the investment plan to do that. And please approve it. And they're getting approved. You start to see that these enablers are getting put in place. So I think those are the important things to notice. And then maybe round out my comments by other good news. Battery costs are coming down. Battery costs have been the priority across automakers and battery makers for the last, I'm going to say, 14 years. It's 2021. I started working on the Chevy Volt program in 2007. All 14 years, the only talk was how much more money can we throw at the batteries to get cost out? Because it's the big cost driver on the vehicles. It's the part that makes the vehicle incrementally a little bit more costly today still than a gasoline, conventional vehicle. And so battery costs have come down since that sort of early 2007, 2010 period to, even a couple of years ago. I don't even have the latest data right now. But when I was in the industry, they'd already come down 85% from the very high, $800 a kilowatt hour, all the way down to, maybe $150, maybe we're even a little bit lower than that right now, $150 a kilowatt hour. So this is a big deal. And that's exactly the trajectory that needs to keep happening. We got to keep getting cost out of it. They're going to do that by getting raw materials out of these batteries, try to get rid of the cobalt in the batteries, try to minimize the use of lithium, et cetera. You got to minimize these materials to get those raw material cost counts down. And then let me talk just a second, if it's okay, Chuck, if I'm okay to go maybe just a little bit more, perfect. Let me talk about charging infrastructure, because it's not easy either. I don't want to paint a picture that any of this is easy. It's been 15 years in the works, and we're still not done. So I want to share with you the things that we deal with and contend with here in the United States. And I'm wondering if you deal with it too, certainly things maybe to look out for. In 2015, there were only 204 chargers, fast chargers in the United States, other than Tesla, because that's a proprietary system. But for everyone else, there were 204 DC fast chargers available in the entire United States. Chuck showed you the study that says, hey, to reduce 45% of carbon out of transportation, we've got to attack light duty vehicles and medium and heavy duty vehicles in the United States. It also means that by 2030, we need in order to support the 70 million electric vehicles that are required to get to the climate numbers, if we're going to support 70 million EVs, you need 375,000 DC charge ports, 375,000. In 2015, there were 204 chargers. There was no redundancy. Every station had one charger. If it worked, good. If it didn't work, you had to go drive, 30 miles, 80 miles away to another station. So we need 375,000. We were at 204 back then. Today we're at about 20,000. I'm going to sort of throw everybody in together. The Tesla and the standard for everyone else is basically now the SAE combo charger now. To be on pathway to actually install the amount of charging that we need, we're today installing about 600 charging ports every quarter. 600 charging ports, DC fast charging ports every quarter. We actually need to be on a path to installing 10,000 a quarter to get to the sort of the 375,000 chargers by 2030. Again, the numbers are daunting. They're really big. It doesn't keep us from focusing on the near term with an eye always on the vision, like where are we trying to get? And what are the levers to affect the most amount of change as quickly as we possibly can? So we're nowhere near the pace, but we're aware of that here in the United States. Some of the things that are getting in our way that I want to just sort of briefly mention. We're slowed down by two things primarily. One is just the time it takes to permit stations. Here in the United States, that can easily take 9 months to get a DC fast charger hub permitted. Same thing for grid interconnect with the utility. From the day you actually apply to a utility and say, hey, I want to put a charger in the ground over here, it can take 8 months to actually get power in the ground. And that's on average across the US. That's an average. Sometimes I'm told, I've heard stories where it can take a year and a half to actually get power connected over to a site. So those two issues, the time it takes to permit and the time it takes to get grid power to a site, these are the things that actually prevent private investment from entering the market because no one knows how to measure those numbers. The EV charging providers don't know what it takes. The utility doesn't know what it takes to permit. The permitting, the cities don't know what it takes to get the utility to power up the sites. These sort of systemic delays on the system are really dragging down the system. EV charging providers, they know the cost of hardware and the cost of hardware is coming down. The cost of software is a non-issue. All that stuff can be calculated in a business plan, but you can't calculate the uncertainty of something that might take 4 weeks or might take 9 months or might take a year and a half. And those are some areas of focus that our RMI mobility team is really focused on to help come up with sort of national practices, best practices that drive out the stuff that doesn't have to be part of permitting evaluations. Focus on the stuff that makes it safe. We want to be safe. What makes it safe and what drives the process forward? And so I think that sort of maybe just concluding thoughts, when I think about how some of the utilities and the automakers and we are looking, and I think that you guys are already doing this. I think you've done a really, really laudable job in the way you've approached electrification. I can't give you enough kudos for what you've done and how you've approached it, but just want to reinforce this idea. Keep your sights on where you're trying to get by 2030 and 2035. Keep your sights on that number. Fess up, be honest about the pace of installations of infrastructure or the pace of adoption of vehicles. Be honest about what that is and figure out what it takes to actually get on the pathway to realize what you're trying to achieve by 2030 and 2035, just like the utilities are doing with investment plans now with their regulators, just like the automakers are doing, one plant at a time, get the money over there, reinvest in that plant, turn it from a gasoline vehicle manufacturing plant over to an EV plant and move on. So good luck to you guys. Happy to participate and answer any questions that might come up during the panel. Thank you.
Wonderful, excellent. Thank you so much for that fantastic overview, Britta. It really is a lot of information and a lot of moving parts. And I am happy to see that you've pointed out that Bermuda is actually in a good place and has already started the process. I know both you and Chuck have delivered a lot of fantastic information, including a lot of great statistics. And I'm sure attendees are going to be very curious and dig in a little more with some questions. I see some questions already posted in the chat. But I want to ask attendees if you can save your questions for the end of the presentations. We'll have a, feel free to post them in the chat in real time. We're happy we'll collect them, and we'll have a Q&A session at the very end of the presentations, all right? So thank you all so much. We have 2 more presenters that are going to be coming your way, again, with a different perspective. And, you know, these perspectives are all prepared to give you a well-rounded view of what's happening globally, what's happening in the US, and we talked about the UK market. We're also going to talk next right now about the regional perspective and what is happening in the Caribbean region in terms of the renewable energy, in terms of the EV and mobility transition. So at this point, I would like to ask Joan to turn her screen on. Joan Arbear from UNEP will be discussing the regional perspective in EV transition. Hi, Joan.
Hi, thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Brita and Chuck, for all the information. I would like to share with you, as David was saying, the vision, what we've seen going on in the Latin American Caribbean region in terms of electric mobility. Just before that, I would like to present myself very briefly. I'm Johnny. I work for, sorry, just try to go back to, so, okay. I work for UNEP in a team that is called MOVE. We lead the all the projects from UNEP in electric mobility in the region. And one of our duties is to create this knowledge, this information, collect the information on the region and put it in a yearly document that we issue. So we've been collecting information, qualitative information, let's say, collecting numbers of how many vehicles there are, how many buses, how many private vehicles there are in the region. But in the last year, because of what we know about the pandemic and how has disrupted everything, we focus more on the trends. That are the things that I would like to show you right now. So one of the first trends that I want to talk about is the commitments, international, national, and subnational commitments going on in the region. So until last year, there was this new NDC, National Determined Contributions, with the Paris Agreement that were updated for many of the countries in the region. It turned out that out of 33 countries in the region, 27 of them had transportation as a main strategy to decarbonize the economy and get to the Paris Agreement, or not getting farther than 1.5 degrees by 2050. So it is a very big news that they are looking into transportation as a big issue for decarbonization. Many of them do talk directly about electric mobility and how to pursue that. And also there is a trend that is going below the international commitments down to national and subnational, where we have many countries writing down or already published their national electric mobility strategies, combining all the necessary policy issues that will lead to having these international commitment down to earth and committing all the governmental levels in each country. For pursuing that goal, that is not easy, we have been seeing a second trend that is creating this institutional arrangement to be able to lead on that commitment. We know that electric mobility involves many sectors, mainly at governmental level 3, that would be energy, transportation, and environmental sectors. Each of those have their own, let's say, goals and competencies and responsibilities, and they have to come together to actually have a common view, a common plan, a common strategy, common activities to deliver what is needed for electric mobility. So we've been seeing new institutional arrangement with committees, with groups, working groups, national working groups that are being developed to actually be able to provide all the necessary support for electric mobility. And I want to remark in this side, what we've been seeing in the Caribbean as part of the electric mobility working group of the CARICOM. We've been trying to create that same thing in the Latin American countries, having a place with all the countries can talk about it and solve the problems commonly and coordinately. That is a very much way easier way to pursue the electric mobility. We've been seeing there are much more EV vehicles, not only vehicles, but categories of vehicles. So we've been seeing in the region entering, as you were saying, SUVs, light last mile delivery vehicles, obviously micromobility bikes and all these type of low micromobility vehicles. We've been seeing a lot more EV categories. I mean, in Latin American countries, one of the issues, the biggest one of the issues, is that the electric vehicles coming in from outside are very high category, like luxury, let's say. So the cost, it actually is not comparable to a normal vehicle, a normal ICE vehicle that a normal, middle class person in the region will buy, versus an electric vehicle, because electric vehicles, it weighs more luxury than it is. So we've been seeing new models coming in that do actually meet the standard, the normal standard of an ICE vehicle, becoming making it more easier to buy for many Latin American people. The number 4 even number is the high number of electric public transportation pilots or vehicles already in operation in the region, and how all these responsible people for these projects are really engaging with other cities to exchange information and knowledge. That is really, really important. We know that there are few cities in the region, Santiago de Chile and Bogota mainly, that do have a large number of vehicles already on operation to be delivered in this year. But the good thing is that both governments are willing to share the information, to share the experience, and to get out there all the information. In this case, also particularly in the Caribbean, the vehicles that enter in Barbados are a really good example also, because it's another kind of project on how to enter electric public transportation vehicles in a country. That is also very interesting for all the many, let's say, countries in Latin America. The number 5 would be the charging infrastructure. We have been seeing a very big deployment of charging infrastructure. We do have redundancy in some cities right now. And related to that, we see that the utilities are creating, both public and private utilities are creating payment plans, different fares for charging electric vehicles, prepaid plans, everything that is needed for the electric vehicle user to be comfortable, to feel that to actually save money, and to be able to ride the vehicles without getting into the trouble and having any range and anxiety. We do see that there are a big number of civil associations that do lead all the public talk, let's say nationally, about this electric mobility deployment, how it should be. They do collect information. They create big events to showcase projects, to show the vehicles. So it is a big movement that is starting to get to really high levels in some countries, and do these communicational activities pretty widely. In terms of education, that is one of the other things that education as a capacity building to pursue electrification. We've seen that there are not many universities that are providing formal education for electric mobility engineers. But we've been seeing a lot of courses, both in universities and outside universities, that do provide this technical information, but we still have a gap to fill to kind of enter the electric mobility in other studies, kind of cross-cutting element in, you know, people that study citywide urban planning or public transportation engineering or transport engineering. So how to get those ideas or those elements of electric mobility cross-cutting in other formal education that need to be aware of what is going on and what will be the requirements for each of the sessions. The other one that both Britt and Chuck talk about is the industry. We do have big industry automotive makers in the region. We have Brazil and Mexico and Argentina, for example, that do have a big automotive industry. We've been seeing, as well as the same thing as in the US, we've seen this big automotive industry actually changing, starting to modify the factories to provide electric vehicles. Obviously, Mexico specifically is very driven by what is going on in the US, the US market, let's say. So it is obviously influencing the automotive industry in the region. We also must say that in terms of industry in the region is not only being seen as automotive industry, but it's also seen on the mining of the lithium, as we have one of the biggest reserves of lithium in the region, and how can that sector be developed not only to be an extractive sector, not only to get the lithium out and sell it, but actually create more added value in the countries that don't have that lithium. The other one is that we've been seeing an innovative process of both services and products regarding electric mobility. We have software developers. We have battery recycling companies starting to appear in many countries. So it's been let's say electric mobility has been a driver for innovation in the region. And lastly, all the banking sector and investment. We've seen new business models coming in. We've seen commercial and development banks creating special products for investment in electric mobility, both to fleets, public transportation fleets, governmental fleets, but also for private consumers, that they will now have special loans to buy electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. So we've been seeing a big change that we think that kind of start this big kind of, as a revolution of electric mobility in the region. So that will be, I will be open to any question.
Thank you so much, Joan. Really appreciate your perspective and laying out some of the trends that are happening in the region. It is very interesting to see that both the Latin American perspective and the Caribbean perspective, that there's a lot of activity happening, and it sort of ties into some of the same trends that are happening globally in the US and the European markets. So we have to address a lot of the same key principles and charging infrastructure and education, a whole lot of other areas, although we have a good start to the transition happening throughout. So I look forward to the Q&A session where persons can ask some more specific questions. Up next, we have Mr. Stephen Weinstein, who's a familiar face in Bermuda as the CEO of the Bermuda Business Development Agency. Steve has been involved in a lot of various initiatives called new industry building initiatives for Bermuda. And Steve is going to So to give us a perspective on the lay of the land in Bermuda and sort of the enabling framework that exists today or is planned for tomorrow. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much.
Good morning, David.
Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Let me prepare to share my screen. Oops. Okay. Have I succeeded?
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. First assignment done. So good morning again, everyone. As David so graciously introduced, I am the chair of the Bermuda Business Development Agency, which is a public-private partnership in Bermuda with a mission of fostering sustainable, equitable prosperity for Bermuda and Bermudians. A key focus of our efforts and initiatives, along with our partners and stakeholders like the government right now, is to foster and expand Bermuda's position in the world as a hub for climate risk finance, but also climate-linked innovation more broadly. And I'll try to address that quickly today in the framework of how that ties into the EV community and some of the exciting global projects we've heard about already today. Our broader vision is to establish Bermuda as a premier climate innovation capital. And if you're not very familiar with Bermuda, Bermuda currently and for decades has been the capital of global climate-driven reinsurance risk. Our economy is disproportionately shaped by that sector. And over time, we've built up expertise, human capital, technology, in a service environment around this climate-driven industry, which aligns so well with our conservation and environmental commitments and values as well. We are now focused on expanding into adjacent verticals. The mission of the BDA is to support the success of these goals for the broader community, for Bermudian, but for entrepreneurs, investors, and capital allocators who have exciting strategies, for example, in spaces like EV. We believe, as I'm sure so many of you do, that the world's top challenge, which of course is the climate crisis, is simultaneously the most interesting business and investment activity and opportunity. And from a Bermuda perspective, we believe for Bermuda, this is an actual economic development idea. And as a result, our climate themes, establishing Bermuda as a hub for climate innovation, is our top current national priority. In respect of EV, I think in particular, this ties into what we sometimes call Project Beta Test. Our prospect that for a range of products and services, Bermuda can be an ideal jurisdiction for beta testing. We are not a large market, which of course is the case with so many other island communities. But that dynamic can also be a great strength because we can offer very clean data. We only have one port of entry. There's only one utility. There's no community next door. And if that set of attributes is valuable for your beta test, we can be a very positive jurisdiction for you. Overall, as I touched upon, we are innovation friendly, but particularly in respect of climate theme, given our prioritization of that broader sector right now. I was interested to hear, we're going to touch upon the delays in permitting. Bermuda is a unified, consolidated government. We offer both stability and agility. So to the extent that people have to wrestle with boroughs, counties, states, cities, a range of federal agencies, Bermuda can come back with rapid responses, in part because it's only one party. The island of Bermuda is the jurisdiction that will matter for anything that we do in Bermuda. And we are a tech-savvy human capital pool. More on that in a little bit. Just to emphasize, this is our top priority. And I haven't included a link on the slide, but I would direct you to the proclamations that government issued in and around Earth Day, defining some of our key values and aspirations in respect of the climate, protecting our important environment, including our oceans and corals and reef, enhancing our resilience. As an island community, we are on the knife's edge of rising storm risk, including rising sea levels. Restoring and enhancing our endemic ecosystems, which, as an aside, are important buffers for that type of storm risk. Establishing ourselves as a climate risk finance capital, which is important to many of my stakeholders. We also made some important commitments and aspirations in respect of emissions. I think from a perspective of what we can do, try to punch above our weight, some really robust emissions targets. And as part of that, a commitment to electrification of vehicles, beginning with Bermuda government vehicles and moving into the public sector, And we've talked a bit about bikes, banning two-stroke motorcycles, which traditionally have been an important hub of transportation for Bermuda. So this matters. We only have one government, and when they put things out in public, they're committed to it. I was pleased to see this, and it will drive, I think, attention to these issues in a range of the adaptive and transition technologies that we're already starting to see. More broadly, a range of key government initiatives support these verticals and these strategies, and are here to support and accelerate innovation, including climate-driven innovation. And while the prior slide touched upon some newer policies, more broadly, our traditional advantages, we think, also suit innovation in the climate space as well. I touched upon our human capital. Across my career, I've always done well investing in Bermuda and in Bermudians. That will be true in electric vehicles and the climate transition space more broadly. It is a fantastic pool of passionate talent that cares about Bermuda, and as a result of that is willing to invest in technology innovations that they know will contribute to a more sustainable, lower emission future. It's a very tech forward and early adapter workforce, and willing to experiment. So great for beta testing, great for EV, people who care about climate. There is no climate hoax in Bermuda. Our human capital is an advantage to a crew business. It's also an advantage for the implementation of important transition strategies like electric vehicles. And finally, our broader culture of climate awareness and environmental stewardship aligns so well with these initiatives. The Western world's first conservation statute dates back to the first couple of decades of the 17th century in Bermuda. We have 4 centuries of environmental stewardship, and that's why after 4 centuries, our highly populated island remains so beautiful and our corals, reefs, and oceans remain so pristine. The NGO community is very robust in Bermuda around climate issues and prepared, I think, to partner with initiatives like this and to carry your message more broadly to their networks. There's an amazing amount of scientific research already going on in Bermuda that aligns reasonably well with these initiatives. While I would declare interest, as we say in Bermuda, I'm a trustee of BIOS, the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Science. There's really fascinating technology going out of BIOS as described on their website, bios.edu, in respect of autonomous vehicles, gliders, drones, which BIOS uses, of course, for research and data gathering, but ties so well with some of these climate themes. So as you explore Bermuda as a potential market, as a market for beta testing, as a place to showcase the power of electrification, electric vehicles, I encourage you to explore this climate and green community that will embrace these values and look to partner with you. Well, I will stop sharing and close. It was fun for me to follow Britta, because it's rare for me to be in a panel with people who speak at my cadence or faster. And more broadly, an honor to be with all of you, and really inspired to hear these presentations. And I want to applaud what you're doing and hope that Bermuda more broadly can partner with you to the greatest extent possible. Thanks for including me today.
Thank you for sharing your perspective on not only the mobility transition, but how that fits into the Bermuda context and the environment that is set, that's primed to enable the transition to happen, Steve. With that said, we're going to roll right into a Q&A session. We have about 10 minutes left for this session. I know a couple of questions were queued up. But Steve, since I have you here and I know you're on a very tight schedule, I want to toss a question at you, sort of given the framework that was established here today, apologies, I'm losing my voice. Given the framework that was established here today, what sort of, in terms of the Bermuda context, how do you see Bermuda positioned to take advantage of some of those trends, and what are the sort of major enabling, specific enabling objectives do you see Bermuda having to pursue in order to enable the EV transition?
Yeah, thank you for that, David. So ranging from the specific out to the more aspirational, specifically, we have adopted targets, aspirations, and frameworks to drive electric uptick and to meet the commitments that we broadcast to the world. The electrification of the grid and the vehicles will be critical, and the government has made specific statements in respect of supporting the electrification of its fleet and driving consumer usage towards the consumer market. Bermuda wants to be a leader on climate. And that extends to the government, to the climate forward population, as I've described, but also to the sector that currently drives the economy, the global B2B insurance sector. Bermuda is renowned for its expertise in wildfires, hurricanes, flooding, tsunamis. These are climate-driven risks. The companies are largely public, listed on the New York and London and Tokyo and Hong Kong stock exchanges. It's extremely important to them that they operate in jurisdictions that have high ESG scores and that their own activities show high ESG ratings. An increasingly important dynamic in the public and public finance markets. That aligns really well because I will share with you some of the models and rating frameworks that we see specifically ask about your fleet, or at least initiatives in the case of companies that have no fleet to support lower emissions targets. I think all of that is wind at your back, and some of those dynamics are unusually acute and favorable for EV in Bermuda.
Fantastic, thank you. With that said, Britta, I think I'll go to one of the questions asked in the chat here. This was asked by Gerald Saltus. And the question is, does US government fleet include military and police fleets?
Yeah, I actually dropped something in the chat room so you guys can poke at those numbers. I can't remember what Chuck threw out there, but I think he was talking about a couple 100,000 vehicles. And that sounds like sort of the civilian use of vehicles in the federal fleet. So the federal fleet has about 645,000 vehicles. 245,000 of those are these sort of civilian use, guys and gals getting to and from offices and so on. There are another 225,000 postal trucks, the Postal Service, USPS. That's another 225,000 vehicles. And then the military is also included in that much bigger number, 173,000 vehicles. But the police cars are almost always sourced locally, cities, townships. The state might procure sort of sheriff vehicles and so on, but those are all sort of much lower, down in the local and state jurisdictions. The federal fleet is really just the federal government operating either the military or the vehicles or the post office, as I said. Hope that helps everyone understand sort of the scale. And maybe I'll just add some color if you don't know what's going on with the post service, but our US Postal Service trucks get pretty old. I think the last time don't quote me on this, but the last time those vehicles were designed, I think the ones currently in service was about like in 1982 or something. They're very old design vehicles. So they went through this long procurement process. I know you guys know a little bit about procurement processes, but they went through this very long multi-year procurement process. Nobody wants to start the process over again. However, they procured them from a company called Oshkosh, who really doesn't do electric vehicles. Now, they said they would do some, but there's a real battle on trying to figure out this is the wrong moment in time to not make them all electric when you're going to buy a new generation of vehicles that may be on the road for 30 to 40 years. So it's something everyone's watching very carefully. There's a lot of pressure on Washington to get this right and make those electric. But just so you have a little bit of inside baseball into what happens here in this country too, not everything is real easy and sort of drops in place in the right time with the right decision making.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We have another question concerning we have another question concerning the recycling of vehicles, and that would also lead into the recycling of battery systems that come with those vehicles in the Bermuda context. Could you dig in a little bit on how they're collaborating, or how the industry is collaborating regionally and internationally to make sure there is sort of proper standards on recycling of vehicles and what some of the trends you're seeing there? This is for you, Joan, sorry.
Okay, thank you, David. I must say there is a kind of a change in the industry, I must say, because of this recycling of batteries. There are many countries that are setting the recycling and scrappage, if it's needed, of the batteries on the head of the companies, of the automotive companies. So now the automotive company is kind of responsible for something that will come up after 15 years after the car is sold. So there's a whole new perspective of how these cells are done into the market, right? We know that some companies such as Nissan, they do have a battery recycling factory or plant, but they haven't yet put it in full production because they haven't received many batteries yet. So I know it's a big concern. We are supporting the countries to create the proper regulation to get that in control when the time comes, so they can have everything settled, everything put it down clearly, so when the time comes for the battery recycling moment, they will have everything done. But the reality is that right now there are not many batteries being recycled. So I think that they are not a very big industry to be developed yet. However, we do have in the region, I know for sure, a few companies in Costa Rica and Argentina that they are actually working towards having that installation, that plant ready as soon as possible, because they know that they will start by recycling lithium batteries for computers, PCs, cellular phones, whatever, but then expanding that to car batteries. So the next question, how would that be? We are trying to the countries to get a common idea on where the responsibility or who is going to be the responsible for that scrapping or recycling of the battery, not to get different situation in each country, meaning that if, I don't know, Chile states that the responsible for the battery is the manufacturing company, the one who sells or the one who imports the vehicle, then it would have sense to have, I don't know, Bolivia or Ecuador saying something different, because then the market gets its really different ideas on how they would do it, right? And actually doesn't make a big market. That is what we're trying to get for electric vehicles. So yeah, it's a big trend still to be developed, kind of.
Well, I appreciate your comments, because although there's a concern for the market, it seems like there's an actual market opportunity or entrepreneurial opportunity to lean into, because it's all new and there's a need and demand for it. Thank you for that perspective. Chuck, I'll ask you to sort of, because we're right up on time, I'll ask you sort of bring it together, because you not only share sort of the US perspective, and you shared a lot of the UK information, some US perspective. You've heard all the presenters today talking about the regional and the context in Bermuda. What I realize is that there's a lot of complexities to the US market and UK markets, where there are a lot of things that you mentioned and considered. How do we bridge that with the Bermuda island or regional context?
Well, I got to launch in with a reaction I had to what Britta was bringing up about the U.S. fleet and the Postal Service. Those quick start stops, like we're talking about postal delivery, they are so obvious for this technology. The other part of that is fleets. I know we've touched on that a number of times, but that's a single decision point that results in tens and hundreds of purchases every year. They can respond to the total cost of ownership and really take advantage of those savings. So I just kind of want to focus in on fleets and those right duty cycles. As your colleagues would say, every day that we're operating more internal combustion engines, we're essentially wasting money by not moving to electric vehicles. And then the experience in, working there in Bermuda and on the government fleet, challenges. When we have money available to spend on EVs today, and maybe even through next year, we don't have all of the options that we need. So I would challenge us to pause on purchasing another internal combustion engine. Can't we just delay that decision for a year or two? Because every ICE that we purchase, that we justify we need to purchase, we're locking in those emissions for 15 years. So let's spend our money on what we can buy today and pay attention to what we really need to replace around the corner. And then I'll just wrap that with, economically speaking, when we look at the cost of electricity in Bermuda specific case compared to the cost of gasoline, if we're purchasing cars at something like a 25% upfront price premium, we will get 40 to 60%, let's say half of savings in fuel and maintenance over the lifetime of that vehicle. So we're going to get that money back pretty quickly. So a bit near term, but it's the actions that we can take, this quarter, this fiscal year, this budget, while the market continues to deliver all the other vehicles we need over the next couple of years.
Great, thank you, Chuck. Now, I know we just touched the surface of many, many different topics, and even to talk about the region, it really is hard to compact a lot of information that is happening and a lot of more technical information into very brief presentations. But I really appreciate the panel and the great job you did in bringing it all together and the unique perspectives. Steve had to jump a little bit early for another meeting, so I just wanted to let everyone know he's open to questions. He's posted his LinkedIn email and LinkedIn bio in the chat, so feel free to send questions off to him.